Welcome back to my channel, where we uncover the forgotten corners of the past. Today, I'm taking you into a story about the hidden institution of terror run by the Murphy family in Old Manhattan, a tale you might have never heard before. A mystery buried in the dust of time. A truth that will send shivers down your spine. But before we embark on this journey, take a moment to let me know, where are you listening to this story from? That helps me understand how far these secrets have traveled. And if this story truly captivates you, if it makes you ponder, don't hesitate to give me a like and subscribe to the channel to keep me going. Together, we'll explore the darkest pages of history, and you won't want to miss a thing. Beneath the relentless pulse of modern Manhattan, where neon lights now drown out the memory of shadows, there lies a secret so chilling that even the city's most hardened souls hesitate to speak its name. It began, as all true horrors do, with the discovery, a moment when the past clawed its way back into the present. In the winter of 1934, a team of construction workers, expecting only the stubborn resistance of old brick and mortar, instead unearthed a hidden chamber deep below the Lower East Side. What they found was not gold, nor relics of a forgotten industry, but a cache of documents, faded photographs, and personal effects, each item a silent scream from a time when the city's underbelly was ruled by fear and cruelty. The air in that basement was thick with the scent of mildew and something older, something that clung to the skin and refused to be washed away. Among the debris, a battered ledger, its pages warped by time and damp, revealed a list of names, hundreds of them, most marked with a single, chilling notation: deceased. There were photographs, too, sepia-toned and blurred, capturing the haunted eyes of women whose stories had been erased from history. And there were letters, never sent, written in trembling hands, pleading for mercy, for justice, for anyone to remember them. How could such suffering have gone unnoticed, unchallenged, for so long? How could a place of such darkness have existed in the heart of America's greatest city, hidden in plain sight? The answer, as the evidence would soon reveal, lay not only in the cruelty of a single family, but in the complicity of an entire society, a society willing to look away, to believe the comforting lie rather than confront the unbearable truth. To understand how this nightmare took root, one must first step back into the Manhattan of the mid-19th century, a city teetering on the edge of chaos, its streets swollen with the desperate and the dispossessed. In 1834, New York was a city of contradictions, a beacon of opportunity for some, a labyrinth of misery for others. The population had exploded, fueled by waves of immigrants fleeing famine, war, and persecution. The Irish, in particular, arrived in droves, their hopes battered by the Atlantic crossing, their dreams quickly soured by the realities of tenement life. The Lower East Side was a world apart, a place where the sun rarely reached the ground and the air was thick with the stench of poverty. Overcrowded boarding houses pressed shoulder to shoulder, their windows bricked up or blackened by soot. Children darted through alleys, barefoot and wild-eyed, while mothers queued for bread or huddled in corners, clutching infants to their chests. Disease was a constant companion: cholera, typhus, and the slow, wasting hunger that gnawed at the bones of the poor. Yet amid this squalor, a different kind of fever gripped the city, a moral panic, stoked by the flames of the Second Great Awakening. Preachers thundered from pulpits about sin and redemption, about the dangers of vice and the need for purification. Reformers, armed with good intentions and iron wills, set out to save the souls of the fallen, especially women, whose virtue was seen as both fragile and essential to the health of the nation. Laws were passed, granting extraordinary powers to religious institutions that promised rehabilitation in the name of salvation. The boundaries between charity and control, between care and coercion, began to blur. It was in this crucible of desperation and zealotry that the Murphy family found their opportunity. The building they chose for their enterprise had once been a textile factory, its vast, echoing halls now silent, its machinery stripped away and sold for scrap. The Murphys transformed it into the House of Religious Correction for Wayward Women, a name that promised hope, but delivered only despair. The location was no accident close enough to the city's heart to attract the attention of judges and officials, yet far enough from polite society to ensure that what happened within its walls would remain unseen. The structure itself seemed to conspire with its new purpose. Windows were bricked over, save for narrow slits that admitted only the barest hint of daylight. Thick insulation muffled every sound, turning screams into whispers that died before they reached the street. The walls, painted in oppressive shades of gray and black, absorbed what little light remained, casting every corridor into perpetual twilight. The effect was immediate and profound. Those who entered soon lost all sense of time, of self, of hope. According to city records from the era, the House of Religious Correction was lauded as a model of progressive reform. Pamphlets extolled its methods: prayer, honest labor, Christian discipline, and judges eagerly sentenced women there for crimes as minor as speaking too boldly in public or being seen alone after dark. The Murphy family courted the city's elite, offering testimonials from reformed women and inviting officials to tour the spotless, carefully staged public areas of the institution behind closed doors. However, a different reality unfolded, one that would haunt the city for generations. At the heart of this darkness stood the Murphys themselves, a family whose public piety masked a capacity for cruelty that defied comprehension. Patrick Murphy, the patriarch, was a man forged in the fires of Ireland's most notorious prisons. His frame was imposing, his hands scarred and calloused, his face marked by a jagged scar that seemed to smile even when he did not. But it was his eyes, pale, cold, and unblinking, that truly unsettled those who met him. He spoke of God's will with the certainty of a man who believed himself to be its instrument, and he had learned, in the old country, that every soul could be broken with the right combination of pain and persuasion. Kathleen Murphy, his wife, was no less formidable. To the outside world, she was the very image of maternal care, a woman of modest means and quiet devotion, always ready with a kind word or a gentle touch. Yet those who fell under her authority soon learned that her compassion was a mask, concealing a mind as sharp and unyielding as any blade. She had studied the methods of the Magdalen laundries in Ireland, perfecting the art of psychological torment. Her punishments were subtle, her words laced with poison, her satisfaction in the suffering of others barely hidden behind a veneer of concern. Shah Murphy, Patrick's younger brother, brought a different kind of darkness to the family enterprise. A failed seminarian, he possessed a brilliant mind twisted by rejection and resentment. Expelled from multiple theological schools for his unorthodox interpretations of Scripture, Shah had become an expert in the use of religious guilt as a weapon. His sermons could reduce grown women to tears. ringing confessions of sins they had never committed. He studied the interrogation techniques of the Spanish Inquisition, not as history, but as a manual for breaking the human spirit. The Murphy family's operation was a symphony of cruelty, each member playing their part with chilling precision. Thomas Murphy, Patrick's eldest son, returned from Boston with a head for business and a network of corrupt officials at his disposal. He understood that true power lay not in violence, but in the systematic destruction of hope. Mary Murphy, Patrick's sister-in-law, brought her own brand of expertise, a survivor of famine and shipboard plague. She had learned to keep the weak alive just long enough to prolong their suffering. Her knowledge of herbs and crude surgery making her indispensable to the family's grim enterprise. From the very beginning, there were signs that all was not as it seemed. Women sent to the House of Religious Correction vanished from public view. Their families told only that they were undergoing intensive rehabilitation. Those who returned, if they returned at all, were changed, their eyes hollow, their voices barely more than whispers. Rumors spread through the immigrant communities, stories of midnight screams, of women seen only as shadows behind barred windows, of a place where redemption was just another word for ruin. Yet the city, hungry for order and eager to believe in the promise of reform, looked away. Judges, police captains, and ministers became regular visitors, their presence lending an air of legitimacy to the institution. The Murphy family's influence grew, their wealth multiplied, and the darkness at the heart of Manhattan deepened with every passing year. It is here, in the gathering gloom of a city on the brink, that our story truly begins, not with a single act of evil, but with the slow, relentless accumulation of small cruelties, each one building upon the last, until the line between salvation and damnation was all but erased. The House of Religious Correction became a world unto itself, governed by its own rules, its own rituals, its own unspoken code of silence. And at the center of it all, the Murphys watched, waited, and perfected their art masters of a domain where hope went to die, and where the echoes of suffering would linger long after the last stone was laid to rest. The first true fracture in the institution's carefully constructed facade came not with a scream, but with a whisper, a subtle shift in the air, a question left unanswered, a glance exchanged in the dim corridors. The House of Religious Correction, for all its outward piety, was a fortress of secrets. Its iron gates swung open each morning to admit new arrivals, women accused of sins both real and imagined, yet those same gates rarely opened to let anyone out. The intake ritual was a performance of humiliation and erasure. Newcomers were stripped of their names, their belongings burned in a ceremony that Patrick Murphy called casting off the old self. The flames devoured wedding rings, lockets, and faded letters from home, leaving only ashes and the echo of lost identities. Inside, the women were assigned numbers, not names. Their days blurred into a relentless cycle of forced labor, prayer, and confession. The air was thick with the scent of lye and sweat from the laundry rooms, mingling with the metallic tang of fear. At dawn, they knelt on cold stone floors, reciting prayers under the watchful gaze of Shah Murphy, whose sermons twisted scripture into instruments of shame. Each confession was recorded, not as a path to forgiveness, but as evidence of depravity ammunition for the institution's legal and financial machinery. Yet, even in this world of shadows, Small acts of resistance flickered. A woman would hide a scrap of cloth, a lock of hair, a whispered memory of a former life. Sometimes, a new arrival would refuse to break, her eyes burning with defiance even as her body weakened. These sparks of rebellion were quickly snuffed out, but they left traces, rumors that seeped through the walls and into the city beyond. It was in the Irish neighborhoods of the Lower East Side that the first questions began to surface. Mothers whispered about daughters who had vanished after a single misstep, an argument with a neighbor, a night spent out too late, a letter found in the wrong hands. According to parish records from St. Bridget's Church, the number of missing women rose sharply in the years after the House of Religious Correction opened its doors. Yet, when families inquired, they were met with silence or vague assurances that their loved ones were being reformed for their own good. The city's newspapers, ever hungry for scandal, occasionally published stories of disappearances, but these were quickly buried beneath tales of political intrigue and business triumph. The Murphy family's connections ran deep. Judges, police captains, and businessmen all had a stake in the institution's continued operation. Some were clients, others beneficiaries of the labor the women provided. The house's laundry and sewing services supplied linens and uniforms to hotels, hospitals, and even the city's own police force. Its reputation as a place of moral rehabilitation was carefully cultivated, its true nature hidden behind a veneer of Christian charity. But the cracks widened. In 1842, a young woman named Nora O'Donnell managed to escape the house under cover of darkness. Her story, recorded in the diary of a sympathetic nun at St. Mary's Convent, was a litany of abuse and degradation. She spoke of endless days spent scrubbing blood from stone floors, of nights punctuated by the cries of women taken for private counseling with wealthy patrons. Her account was dismissed by authorities as the ravings of a hysteric. But among the city's poor, it spread like wildfire. Mothers began to warn their daughters, avoid the house at all costs, for those who enter rarely return. Inside the institution, the pressure mounted. The Murphy family, sensing the growing unease, tightened their grip. Punishments became more severe, surveillance more constant. Kathleen Murphy, ever the master of psychological torment, devised new rituals of control, public confessions, forced betrayals, the isolation of those who dared to question. The women learned to fear not only their captors, but each other. Trust became a luxury none could afford. As the years passed, the House of Religious Correction became a machine of exploitation, its gears lubricated by suffering and silence. The intake numbers swelled, but the list of those released remained pitifully short. According to city records from 1850, of the 456 women admitted in the institution's first decade, fewer than a third ever left alive. The rest vanished into the building's labyrinthine depths, their fates recorded only in ledgers marked deceased or transferred. Meanwhile, the city continued to look away. The Murphy family's influence grew, their wealth multiplied, and the shadow over Manhattan lengthened with every passing year. But beneath the surface, the pressure was building. The stories of the missing, the rumors of abuse, the whispers of rebellion, all were gathering force, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally break free. It was not a single event, but a series of revelations that brought the institution's secrets into the harsh light of day. The first came in the form of a ledger, discovered by a city auditor investigating irregularities in municipal contracts. The book, hidden behind a false wall in Thomas Murphy's office, contained detailed records of payments to judges, police officers, and city officials. It listed the names of clients, some of the city's most respected men, alongside the services they had purchased. The evidence was damning, but the auditor, fearing for his own safety, turned the ledger over to a trusted journalist rather than the authorities. The resulting exposé, published in the New York Herald, sent shockwaves through the city. For the first time, the public glimpsed the true nature of the House of Religious Correction, not as a sanctuary for the lost, but as a marketplace for human suffering. The article described the intake rituals, the forced labor, the private counseling sessions with wealthy patrons. It named names, implicating judges, businessmen, and even clergy in the institution's web of exploitation. The city erupted in outrage. Protesters gathered outside the house, demanding answers. The Murphy family, caught off guard, scrambled to contain the damage. They denied the allegations, accused their accusers of slander, and called upon their allies in government and the church to defend them. For a time, it seemed they might succeed. The protests were dispersed. The journalist threatened into silence, and the house continued its operations, albeit under increased scrutiny. But the damage was done. The institution's aura of invincibility had been shattered. More women came forward, their stories echoing Nora O'Donnell's account of abuse and degradation. According to testimony collected by the Ladies' Moral Reform Society, the house was a place where hope was systematically destroyed, where women were reduced to commodities, their suffering monetized for the benefit of the powerful. The revelations did not end there. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a network of corruption that extended far beyond the walls of the house. The Murphy family had established connections with similar institutions in Boston, Philadelphia, and even as far as London and Paris. Letters found in Thomas Murphy's correspondence detailed the exchange of problematic women between facilities, the sharing of techniques for breaking resistance, and the coordination of efforts to evade law enforcement. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery of the institution's breeding program. Women who became pregnant during their captivity were kept in isolation until they gave birth. Their children were either sold to wealthy families as rescued orphans or raised within the institution to become the next generation of victims. Mary Murphy, with her knowledge of herbs and crude medicine, oversaw this aspect of the operation with chilling efficiency. According to records found in the Hidden Archive, she maintained detailed logs of pregnancies, births, and adoptions, treating the women and their children as livestock to be managed for maximum profit. The scale of the operation was staggering. Financial records revealed that the house generated profits equivalent to millions in today's currency. The Murphy family's wealth was laundered through banks, invested in shipping ventures, and used to buy the silence of those who might otherwise have spoken out. The institution's client list read like a who's who of New York society men whose public reputations were built on piety and philanthropy, but whose private actions betrayed a hunger for power and control. As the truth emerged, the city was forced to confront the darkness at its core. The House of Religious Correction was not an aberration, but a symptom of a deeper malaise, a society willing to sacrifice its most vulnerable members in the name of order and respectability. the Murphy family, for all their cruelty. Were not monsters born in isolation, but products of a system that rewarded ruthlessness and punished compassion? The revelations sparked a wave of reform. Activists demanded stricter oversight of religious and charitable institutions, the establishment of independent boards to investigate allegations of abuse, and the creation of legal protections for women and children. The city's newspapers, once complicit in the cover-up, now competed to expose the full extent of the Murphy family's crimes. Survivors, emboldened by the public outcry, began to tell their stories, stories of loss, of endurance, of the small acts of defiance that had kept hope alive in the darkest of places. Yet, even as the walls closed in, the Murphy family did not go quietly. They destroyed records, bribed officials, and attempted to flee the city. Some succeeded, vanishing into the anonymity of distant cities or foreign shores. Others were captured, their fates sealed by the very evidence they had tried so desperately to erase. In the end, it was not a single act of heroism, but the cumulative weight of countless small truths that brought the house of religious correction to its knees. The institution's fall was as inevitable as it was long overdue, a reckoning not only for the Murphys, but for a city that had allowed such horrors to flourish in its midst. And so, as the dust settled and the last echoes of suffering faded into silence, the true legacy of the House of Religious Correction began to take shape, not in the wealth it had amassed, nor in the power it had wielded, but in the stories of those who had survived, and in the determination of a new generation to ensure that such darkness would never again be allowed to take root. The tide of evidence, once a trickle, became a flood that swept away the last defenses of secrecy. In forensic laboratories, experts examined every scrap of paper, every photograph, every artifact with meticulous care. The ledgers, once hidden in darkness, were now illuminated under the harsh glare of truth. Each entry was cross-referenced with missing persons reports, financial transactions, and city records. The pattern that emerged was undeniable. A systematic, industrial-scale operation of exploitation, mapped out in chilling detail. Courtroom proceedings became a crucible where fact and denial collided. The prosecution, armed with a mountain of evidence, presented their case with relentless clarity. They displayed the ledgers, the coded notations, the receipts for special services. Forensic accountants traced the flow of money through a web of shell companies and offshore accounts. The jury listened as experts explained how the institution's finances were designed to obscure the true nature of its business, laundering profits through legitimate enterprises while hiding the suffering that generated them. But it was the physical evidence that left the deepest mark. The photographs projected onto courtroom walls forced all present to confront the reality of what had transpired. Faces once anonymous now stared back at the world with silent accusation. The images of restraint devices, of rooms designed for isolation and control, of personal effects catalogued and stored as if they were mere inventory, these were not abstractions, but the tangible residue of lives destroyed. The silence in the courtroom was broken only by the occasional gasp, the stifled sob, the sound of a gavel restoring order. Testimony from survivors and witnesses added layers of complexity and pain. Some recounted the daily routines of deprivation and humiliation, the rituals of confession and punishment, the constant surveillance that eroded any sense of self. Others described the psychological warfare waged by those in power, the manipulation of hope, the calculated granting and withdrawal of privileges, the use of isolation to break the will. There were stories of friendships formed in adversity, of small acts of kindness that became lifelines, of moments when resistance flickered even in the darkest hours. One witness, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, described the moment she realized her identity had been erased. "They took my name," she said, "and gave me a number. They burned my letters, my photographs, everything that tied me to the world outside. I became invisible, even to myself." Another spoke of the betrayal by those she had once trusted, officials, clergy, and community leaders who had turned a blind eye or actively participated in the machinery of abuse. The confessions of the accused, when they came, were as varied as the individuals themselves. Some broke down, overcome by guilt and remorse, their words tumbling out in a torrent of regret. They spoke of orders given and obeyed, of lines crossed in the name of duty or ambition, of moments when conscience was silenced by fear or self-interest. Others remained defiant, insisting they had acted for the greater good, or that they were merely cogs in a larger machine. A few, their faces expressionless, recited their roles with chilling detachment, as if recounting the details of a business transaction rather than a human tragedy. Psychological evaluations conducted during the trials revealed the complex interplay of guilt, denial, and rationalization among the accused. Some exhibited signs of profound remorse, haunted by nightmares and plagued by anxiety. Others displayed classic symptoms of moral disengagement, compartmentalizing their actions to avoid confronting the full weight of their responsibility. Court-appointed experts, drawing on emerging theories of trauma and authority, testified that the environment within the institution had fostered a culture of obedience and cruelty, blurring the boundaries between right and wrong. The legal proceedings themselves became a theater of reckoning. Prosecutors presented their case with methodical precision, weaving together documentary evidence, eyewitness testimony, and expert analysis. Defense attorneys, faced with the mountain of proof, struggled to mount credible arguments. Some attempted to shift blame onto the victims, suggesting that their alleged moral failings had justified harsh treatment. Others argued that their clients were themselves victims of a corrupt system, coerced into complicity by threats or blackmail. The public followed every twist and turn of the trials with rapt attention. Newspapers published daily updates, their headlines growing ever more sensational as new details emerged. Editorials called for sweeping reforms, while letters to the editor expressed outrage, sorrow, and disbelief. The city's mood oscillated between anger and shame, pride in the pursuit of justice and horror at the revelations of what had been allowed to fester in its midst. When verdicts were finally delivered, the sense of finality was tempered by a lingering unease. Some of the guilty received the harshest penalties the law could impose: lengthy prison sentences, public disgrace, or, in rare cases, capital punishment. Others, shielded by connections or technicalities, escaped with lighter sentences or fled the jurisdiction altogether. The unevenness of justice became a subject of debate, fueling calls for further investigation and reform. The social fabric of the city was irrevocably altered. Institutions once regarded as pillars of virtue now faced intense scrutiny. Charitable organizations and religious orders were required to submit to regular inspections, their records subject to independent review. New laws were enacted to protect the rights of the vulnerable, and oversight boards were established to ensure accountability. The language of reform became part of the city's daily discourse, as citizens grappled with the implications of what had been uncovered. Yet, for all the changes, the wounds inflicted by the institution's crimes did not heal quickly. Survivors struggled to rebuild their lives, haunted by memories that refused to fade. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, their grief compounded by the knowledge that justice, though served, could never restore what had been taken. The city itself bore the scars of its complicity, its streets and buildings now silent witnesses to a history that could not be erased. Historians, reflecting on the case in years to come, would point to the power of evidence the way a single ledger, a photograph, or a survivor's testimony could pierce the veil of secrecy and force a reckoning. Psychologists would study the dynamics of authority and obedience, seeking to understand how ordinary people could become agents of extraordinary cruelty. Lawmakers would cite the case as a catalyst for reform, a reminder that vigilance and transparency are the only safeguards against the abuse of power. In the years that followed, the city's institutions underwent a transformation. Training programs were established for those working with vulnerable populations, emphasizing ethics, empathy, and the importance of oversight. Survivors were invited to speak at public forums, their stories shaping new policies and inspiring a generation of advocates. Memorials were erected at the site of the former institution, not only to honor the victims, but to serve as a permanent reminder of the consequences of unchecked authority. The arts, too, responded to the revelations. Writers, painters, and filmmakers grappled with the legacy of the case, producing works that explored the boundaries of morality, the dangers of conformity, and the resilience of the human spirit. These cultural responses ensured that the lessons of the past would not be forgotten, embedding them in the city's collective memory. And yet, even as the city moved forward, questions lingered. Could such horrors ever truly be prevented? Or was the potential for darkness always present, waiting for the right conditions to emerge? The debate continued in classrooms, courtrooms, and around dinner tables, a testament to the enduring impact of the investigation. In the years after the trials, the voices of survivors became a force for change. Some found the strength to organize, forming support groups and advocacy organizations that lobbied for further reforms. Their testimonies were recorded and archived, becoming part of the city's historical record. Schools began to teach the story as a cautionary tale, emphasizing the importance of critical thinking, compassion, and the courage to speak out against injustice. The city's leadership, chastened by the scandal, invested in new social programs aimed at preventing the conditions that had allowed such abuses to flourish. Shelters, counseling centers, and legal aid offices were established, providing resources for those at risk. The language of accountability became woven into the fabric of governance, with regular audits, public reporting, and citizen oversight committees. Still, the process of healing was slow and uneven. For many, the trauma lingered in nightmares and flashbacks, in the empty chairs at family tables, in the silence that followed difficult questions. Therapists and counselors drawing on the latest research in trauma recovery, worked tirelessly to help survivors reclaim their lives. Community rituals, vigils, commemorations, and moments of silence offered spaces for collective mourning and remembrance. The legacy of the investigation, then, was not only a matter of law and policy, but of memory and meaning. It was a reminder that the past is never truly past, that the choices of one generation shape the possibilities of the next. The city, marked by its history, moved forward with a new awareness, a recognition that the line between order and oppression is thin, and that the cost of ignoring injustice is always paid in human suffering. The collapse was not sudden, but it was absolute. In the wake of exposure, the city's landscape shifted in ways both visible and unseen. The building that had once loomed as a fortress of piety and discipline was reduced to rubble, its bricks carted away under the watchful eyes of silent crowds. Where there had been the echo of iron doors and the shuffle of numbered feet, there was now only the hollow wind, whistling through a vacant lot. The ground itself seemed to resist new beginnings, as if the soil remembered every secret, every cry that had seeped into its foundation. Official records state that the site remained untouched for decades, a scar left open as a warning and a memorial. No business would take root there. No home would rise. The city planners, perhaps out of guilt or superstition, designated the land as a public space, but few dared to linger after dusk. Children whispered of shadows that moved on their own, of cold spots that lingered even in summer, of a silence that pressed against the ears like a held breath. The community, once complicit in its silence, now bore the weight of collective memory, a burden that could not be shrugged off with the passage of time. The process of rebuilding was fraught with contradiction. On the surface, there was progress, new laws, new oversight, new voices demanding transparency and justice. Yet, beneath the veneer of reform, the city struggled to reconcile its pride with its shame. The institutions that had once wielded unchecked power were now subject to relentless scrutiny, their leaders forced to answer questions that had long been ignored. Some adapted, embracing the new order with public displays of contrition and charity. Others withered, unable to survive in the harsh light of accountability. For those who had survived, the world outside was both a promise and a threat. Freedom, after so many years of confinement, was a landscape of dizzying possibility and paralyzing uncertainty. Some found solace in advocacy, channeling their pain into action. They became the architects of new support networks, the founders of shelters and legal aid societies, the voices that refused to let the past be buried. Others retreated into the shadows, their trust in the world irreparably broken. The city's social fabric, once tightly woven by shared denial, now showed the frayed edges of trauma and loss. Historians note that the transformation was not merely institutional, but existential. The very language of the city changed. Words like rehabilitation and correction lost their innocence, acquiring a patina of suspicion. The rituals of public life parades, sermons, even the ringing of church bells were haunted by the knowledge of what had been hidden in plain sight. The city's art and literature turned inward, grappling with themes of guilt, complicity, and the fragile boundary between order and oppression. Yet, even as the city remade itself, the past refused to be contained. In the archives of universities and the attics of old houses. New evidence surfaced: a diary here, a bundle of letters there, a photograph that had escaped the flames. Each discovery was a reminder that history is never truly settled, that the truth is a living thing, always shifting, always incomplete. Investigators, both professional and amateur, continued to probe the margins of the story, searching for names that had been erased, for motives that had been obscured by time and fear. The fate of those most intimately connected to the events became the subject of endless speculation. Some vanished, their identities lost in the swirl of migration and reinvention. Others reappeared in unexpected places, their lives marked by a restlessness that could not be soothed. There were rumors of confessions made on deathbeds, of fortunes squandered in distant cities, of children who grew up never knowing the shadows that trailed their family names. The city's rumor mill, ever hungry, spun tales of hauntings and curses, of justice deferred and vengeance exacted in the quiet hours before dawn. The legacy of the institution was not confined to the boundaries of the city. Across the country, and even across the ocean, reformers cited the case as a rallying cry. Laws were rewritten, oversight boards established, and the language of human rights began to supplant the rhetoric of moral purity. Yet, for every advance, there were setbacks, new scandals, new abuses, new forms of silence. The lesson, it seemed, was not that evil could be eradicated, but that it must be recognized and resisted, again and again, in every generation. In the quiet moments, when the city's noise faded and the shadows lengthened, the true cost of the past became clear. The survivors, though few in number, carried within them the memory of what had been endured and overcome. Their stories, recorded in oral histories and memoirs, became a counterweight to the official narratives of progress and redemption. They spoke of nights spent listening for footsteps in the corridor, of friendships forged in adversity, of the small acts of kindness that had made survival possible. They spoke up, too, of the wounds that never fully healed, the nightmares, the mistrust, the sense of being forever marked by what had been done and what had been allowed. The city, for all its efforts to move forward, remained haunted by questions that could not be answered. What had allowed such darkness to flourish? Who had benefited? And who had suffered in silence? How many secrets still lay buried, waiting for the right moment to surface? The official inquiries, for all their thoroughness, could not account for every missing name, every unexplained disappearance, every rumor that refused to die. The boundaries between fact and legend blurred, and the line between justice and vengeance grew thin. In the years that followed, the site of the former institution became a place of pilgrimage. Memorials were erected, inscribed with the names of those known and unknown. On certain nights, candles flickered in the darkness, each flame a testament to a life remembered, a wrong acknowledged, a promise made to the future. The city's children, brought to the site on school trips, listened to the stories with wide eyes, their questions echoing those of generations past. How could this have happened? Could it happen again? The answer, whispered in the wind that swept across the empty lot, was both a warning and a challenge. The past, it seemed, was never truly past. The forces that had enabled cruelty and silenced fear, prejudice, the hunger for power remained present, lurking at the edges of respectability. The city's vigilance, hard won and easily lost, became the only safeguard against the return of darkness. As the decades passed, the story of the institution became woven into the city's identity. It was told and retold in classrooms, in courtrooms, in the pages of novels and the frames of films. Each retelling brought new insights, new questions, new reminders of the fragility of justice and the resilience of those who seek it. The city's artists and writers, drawing on the well of a collective memory, created works that challenged, provoked, and inspired. The legacy of suffering became, paradoxically, a source of strength, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, the human spirit can endure, resist, and demand accountability. Yet, for all the progress, the story remained unfinished. In the archives, in the memories of the old, in the dreams of the young, there lingered the sense that not all had been revealed, that some truth remained just out of reach. The city's historians, ever cautious, warned against the comfort of closure. History, one wrote, is not a solved equation, but a living question. The search for answers continued, driven by the conviction that to forget is to invite repetition. And so, the city lived with its ghosts, the empty lot, the memorials, the stories passed from parent to child, all served as reminders of what had been lost and what had been learned. The survivors, their numbers dwindling with each passing year, became the keepers of memory, their voices a bulwark against the erasure of pain. The city's leaders, mindful of the past, pledged vigilance, transparency, and compassion. Yet, beneath the surface, the old tensions persisted, the old temptations beckoned, and the old questions waited for new answers. In the end, the story of the institution was not merely a tale of crime and punishment, of suffering and survival. It was a meditation on the nature of power, the limits of justice, and the enduring struggle between light and shadow. The city, for all its progress, remained a place of contradictions, a beacon of hope, and a repository of pain. A testament to both the heights of human aspiration and the depths of human failure. What, then, is the lesson to be drawn from these events? Is it that evil can be vanquished by law and reform? Or that it merely changes its shape, adapting to new circumstances and new disguises? Is it that justice, once achieved, is secure, or that it must be defended anew with each generation? The answers, elusive and shifting, lie not in the comfort of certainty, but in the willingness to confront the unknown, to ask the hard questions, to bear witness to the suffering of others. As the city's lights flicker on each evening, casting long shadows across the streets, the memory of the institution endures not as a wound to be hidden, but as a scar to be acknowledged, a lesson to be learned, a warning to be heeded. The price of silence, the cost of complicity, the danger of unchecked authority. These are the truths that echo through the years, demanding remembrance, vigilance, and, above all, the courage to face the darkness within and without. And so, the story ends as it began, with a question. What secrets still lie buried beneath the surface? What voices remain unheard? What wrongs unrighted? What lessons unlearned? The city, marked by its history, moves forward into the unknown, carrying with it the hope that, this time, the darkness will not return unnoticed.